Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan's visit to Qatar is raising new questions about Turkey's objective and involvement in the ongoing Gulf crisis. And as an outpouring of sexual harassment allegations rock Hollywood, how are the showbiz elite dealing with their fallen stars? And can the industry transform scandal into reform? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan is visiting Doha, the capital of Qatar, on Wednesday, following visits to Russia on Monday and Kuwait on Tuesday. Erdogan has been a major supporter of Qatar since Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the UAE and Egypt cut ties and blockaded Qatar in June, accusing the country of supporting terrorism, among other things. Now, Qatar has denied the allegations. The Gulf diplomatic crisis has been escalating over the past 5 months, sparking new questions of what's next in the region. Will Erdogan's visit help mitigate the crisis? What's Turkey's political future as it deepens its involvement with the Middle East and Russia? Joining me for the discussion are Dr. Luciano Zaccara, Assistant Professor from the Gulf Studies Center, Qatar University in Doha, and Professor Selçuk Kulakoglu, Director of Turkish Center for Asia-Pacific Studies in Ankara. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Dr. Zaccara, let me come to you first.
Welcome.
It's been more than 5 months since the onset of the Gulf diplomatic crisis. What message is Erdogan sending by visiting Qatar now?
Well, I think that the message mainly that he's trying to deliver is, in the visit to Qatar, is that Turkey and Qatar, they have a very good relations, that they are reinforcing the strategic alliance that was started to be built some time ago, and that Turkey is very deeply involved in the solutions of the Turkey is very deeply involved in the solution of the crisis that is affecting Qatar and the quartet led by Saudi Arabia, and that's why he decided also to include Kuwait in the tour. But also Turkey is trying to show muscle in visiting Russia, also trying to demonstrate that Turkey has a say in other regional conflicts like Syria, and that maybe that Turkey is able to mediate in order to solve some of the conflicts that are existing in the region.
Professor Kulakoglu, how has the diplomatic crisis been affecting Qatar and its relationship with Turkey? And what does Qatar need from Turkey or Turkish President Erdogan at this moment?
Well, actually, during the crisis, Turkey has a very clear stance to support Qatar, despite Qatar relationship or severing relationship, severing relationship with Saudi Arabia and Saudi-led coalition, Gulf coalition. For that, of course, for Qatar, Turkey's support, political support and economic support, and providing some goods to Qatar during the crisis is very important for Qatar Emir and also Qatar state in general. So during the visit also President Erdogan assures the Turkey's support for Qatar government for its policies, independent policies in the crisis.
Now, in an interview last week, Adel Al-Jubeir, the Saudi foreign minister, said that the Gulf countries are not seeking regime change in Qatar. This is not our policy, he's quoted as saying. Our policy is to see a change in behavior. Dr. Zaccara, how do these Gulf countries perceive President Erdogan's moving closer to Qatar?
Well, what Jubeir says maybe is true. They don't want Qatar to change the government. They don't want a regime change, but asking the things that they were requesting, or the reasons behind all this crisis, is like a kind of regime change, asking too many changes that are affecting the sovereignty of the state. This is something that we have been witnessing since the beginning of the crisis in June. The fact that Turkey is visiting Qatar is maybe a reassurance that Turkey is also supporting the status quo in the region and supporting the current government in Qatar, and there is no way that this can change in the short or mid-term. So the message basically to the GCC states is that even though the GCC, other GCC states are expecting some kind of regime in the long-term policies, in Qatar this will not be the case, and that's why the crisis is currently in a stalemate. We don't see any progress, at least in the last couple of months.
Professor Kolakolu, now Qatar is the third and last leg of President Erdogan's tour after his visit to Russia and Kuwait. Why was Russia chosen as the first stop before Kuwait and Qatar?
Actually, there are some immediate agenda for Turkey and Russia for the relationship in recent terms. And also when we look at Putin-Erdogan summit in Sochi, Russian port, Black Sea port Sochi, we can see that the developments in Syria was the main agenda on that. So actually we can say that President Erdogan's Russia visit or Russia stop and also his meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin was also focused on Middle East issues and developments, particularly for Syria. And Syria is now in the critical stage for the solution. So Turkey and Russia are playing very critical, or particularly power transformation and peaceful settlement for Idlib province particularly. So that's why President Erdogan first moved to Russia and then choose Kuwait and Qatar. I think also the fixing the schedule depending on the timetable of the leaders is another factor, of course. But when we look at Turkish President Erdogan's visit to Russia, Kuwait and Qatar, Turkey's priority for all these three visits were Middle East issues in general and Turkey's role in the Middle East.
Dr. Zakara, now according to Reuters, after more than 4 hours of talks with Putin in the Russian city of Sochi, Erdogan said the two leaders had agreed to focus on a political solution to the conflict in Syria. Given the kind of very icy relationship that Turkey has had since the beginning of the conflict, how do you look at this agreement and the possibility of having a political solution when Russia is involved militarily in this conflict? Is there any possibility of any alternatives?
Well, actually, there were some comments after Putin and Trump mentioned in the ASEAN conference that there was no military solution for the conflict in Syria. So Erdogan mentioned that if there is no military solution, then Russia and the United States should pull out from Syria, given the chance for a political solution. I'm not quite sure that this represented that there is actually an agreement between Russia and Turkey that there should be a political solution without any further military involvement. In any case, Russia, Iran and Turkey have been conducting conversations in order to guarantee some no war zones or de-escalation zones in Syria in order to facilitate humanitarian help. So they were able to broker a kind of deal without the presence of the United States. So to some extent they can show at least they have the will to sit together in a table in order to control their own involvement and their own proxies in the conflicts in Syria and to look for further political solution instead of a military one. I think it is possible long term, although currently I don't think this is a viable option right now.
Professor Kolakolu, Erdogan's second stop, Kuwait, has been leading the mediation efforts in the Gulf dispute. Have we seen any achievement, any progress in that regard? And what is Kuwait's role in this ongoing crisis?
Of course, like Turkey, Kuwait has a neutral stance during the crisis between Saudi-led GCC coalition and Qatar. And also Turkey and Turkish and Qatari leaders, of course, discussed the current situation in the Gulf region and also possible settlement, peaceful settlement for the disputes between Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain. But if you look at the outcomes and also press statements, we couldn't see any detail on that, on further details for that. Maybe Turkey and Qatar will continue their mediation efforts and also keeping warm relations with both sides to settle down crisis and also to freeze at least the escalation of the crisis. So until now, they have some leverages to get some more concrete outcomes for the settlement of the crisis. But now there is no concrete outcome, but two countries, Turkey and Kuwait, will continue their path to negotiate with sides, all sides.
Yeah, let's zoom out a little bit, Dr. Zakhara. According to an analysis by Al Jazeera, the Americans and Europeans think Erdogan is a rash and brash leader. Now, Turkey's great involvement in the crisis and developing relationship with Russia, is it driving the nation further away from the EU?
Well, I would say yes. This is one of the things that Europe is fearing now, and I think the latest moves by Turkey by establishing a military bases in Qatar, in the Horn of Africa, showing more hard power rather than soft power, brokering a deal with Iran and Russia on Syria, regardless of the previous attempts by the European Union or the United Nations. It's driving a little bit Turkey far from the European Union, or at least showing that Turkey maybe is not that interested as it was before.
Yeah, Professor Kolakolu, I got about 1 minute left. Again, putting Erdogan's visit in a larger picture, what does it mean for his future political ambition for Turkey as a country?
Also, the excess shift for Turkey is another strategic excess shift for Turkey is another debate in Turkey. But when we look at Turkey's very structural and deep-rooted relationship with NATO and the EU, it's not very easy to change in a short term. So, of course, Turkey is keeping a balance. So then President Erdogan also try to develop good relationship with all actors and also great powers around the world. Russia is one of them. So we will see the outcomes in coming months. But I think Turkey is just try to enlarge its room for negotiate for all issues together with Russia, the EU, and other countries, United States and other countries.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Professor Seljuk Kolakolu, Director of Turkish Center for Asia-Pacific Studies in Ankara, and Dr. Luciano Zakhara, Assistant Professor from the Gulf Studies Center of Qatar University. A quick first point here. It is increasingly clear that President Erdogan is eyeing to play a greater role in the Middle East, whether in Syria or in the dispute between the Saudi-led bloc of countries and Qatar. Analysts pointing out that whether or not he will succeed is a different question, as his efforts have clearly shown his objective to elevate Turkey as one of the possible pillars in the world in the future. You're watching The Point with me, Lucien. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this.
700 million. That's the number of people China has lifted out of poverty over the last 4 decades. 20 million. That's how many in the country still live under the poverty line. As China begins a final 3-year push to fully eradicate poverty, CGTN heads to the front lines of the fight against the chronic problem. For the first time ever, CGTN will broadcast live from the country's most impoverished villages, documenting the triumphs and tribulations and showing how alleviation efforts are changing life in the heart of rural China.
On a larger scale, just are seeking perhaps spared for themselves.
Join us for the last mile of China's poverty reduction journey, only on CGTN. Welcome back
On Sunday, the hashtag #MeToo transformed from a social media movement to a march against sexual assault and harassment in Hollywood. The outpouring of sexual harassment allegations started with the Harvey Weinstein scandal, which was just the tip of the iceberg, as it turned out, as more and more victims keep stepping forward with their accusations. Now, the bombshell reports making waves in Hollywood are rippling into politics too, including in the UK Parliament and US Congress, not to mention workplaces around the world. So what's behind this tidal wave of women breaking this silence? What special responsibility do high visibility industries like Hollywood have in combating these cases? And how can scandals be turned into reforms and positive changes? Joining me today are Kelly Desmore, founder and producer of the Chico Independent Film Festival in California, and in the studio, comedian and TV host Joe Wang and actress Pan Yi-Xing. All the warmest welcome to all of you. Kelly, let me come to you first. Now, when the New York Times broke the Harvey Weinstein story last month, Charlize Theron, the famous actress, said, "I unfortunately cannot say I'm surprised. This culture has always existed, and not just in Hollywood, but across the world." What was your first reaction when you heard about the scandal?
I was very sad for knowing that most likely many people knew about it. I was born in Hollywood, West Hollywood. I was raised around entertainment industry from some of my relatives, and then I continued in it with education and the arts. So I primarily worked in a male field in and out of, most of my life. So it wasn't shocking, it was deeply disturbing.
Joe, the casting couch is the film industry's term for the exchange of sexual favors from movie hopefuls by Hollywood power brokers, with scores of formerly respected high-profile men losing their jobs and amid claims of sexual misconduct. Can we call this a tipping point for Hollywood to change its old culture? Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi. Thanks for having me here. First of all, I'm not too familiar with the casting couch thing because I'm a comedian and I do some casting for different roles, but it's quite easy for me. Also, the Harvey Weinstein story, it broke, but I wasn't totally surprised.
Why?
But what really surprised me, because there's been rumors over past decades about these harassments and sexual favors. But what really hit home was the Louis C.K. story. And he's the premier stand-up comedian in America. I worked with him before, and I always deemed stand-up comedians as underdogs. They don't have any power. They came from bottom all the way up. So I always assumed that these stand-up comedians are, they will joke about a lot of things on stage, but in their personal life, they're pretty clean.
Yeah.
But it didn't turn out to be the case.
So what could possibly explain what's behind the scandal?
Well, I think it's always been there looking back. I know some female comedians, and I heard rumors saying, oh, maybe this agent is trying to ask sexual favor from that female comedian. But it's just rumors, never quite verified. But I heard it a few times, but now I'm thinking maybe those are true.
It's it's a moment where everybody's kind of pausing and asking a question or two, right? Yeah. Yi-Xing, now you studied in the United States and you're pursuing an acting career. What is your personal experience in this regard, and if you have heard friends talking about it while you were in the United States and maybe possibly while you're working in China?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's just happening in Hollywood or it's just happening in the entertainment industry in China. It's a thing that happens all over the world. It's not about what kind of gender you are or your career, it just happens to people. And I'm sadly to say I have a lot of friends told me their stories in this. One of my really good friend, my sorority sister, she has come up and speak up to her rapist and tell other people about her rape. And that's really brave of her to do it. But despite that she is feeling really afraid and ashamed of it, and she finally able to tell other people, people call her a liar because she don't have enough evidence and proof to prove that, and she is really hurt by it. Right now, like probably like 2 years after that, she's like still crying and she still had panic attack about it.
Not to mention the shattering of her dream in pursuing a career in whichever field. Kelly, my question to you now, many of these cases made against megastars like Harvey or Kevin Spacey date back decades. What is the explanation as to why these accusations are surfacing just now? Kelly. Kelly, do you hear me? It seems that she doesn't hear me. Okay, Joe, do you have an answer to that question?
I think some big stars like Angelina Jolie and Charlize Theron probably set a really good example to encourage women to come forward.
But they waited also a very long time to come out. We wonder what.
It's a long story. I think there's one phrase saying, I like this phrase, it basically just says, absolute power causes absolute corruption of power. Yeah. When a lot of men are in a position of power, they can do things and nobody wants to talk about it. And most people just accept it as a norm in this industry. We're really, go ahead.
I'm sorry. They can just get away with everything they do, and a lot of women, like young actresses, like in the fear of we will jeopardize our career, will just shut up about it. And also a lot of time it's really hard to prove. It's not like other kind of criminal act that you have like really strong physical evidence and you can prove it. A lot of time people just I just don't want to deal with it anymore, because for victims of rape and sexual harassment, a lot of time they can't really deal with it at that time.
Yeah, but how prevalent, just a moment, how prevalent is this a problem in these high visibility industries such as Hollywood? I mean, when you decide to go into the showbiz, are you concerned at all that, if you are not willing to exchange yourself for some favor, you might not get the better parts? Are you concerned at all about this kind of risks?
Yeah, I wasn't, because I'm really young and I wasn't thinking about it too much. My family was like they don't really want me to get into the show business because they heard rumors about this kind of stuff. And luckily for myself, I have really good agency to protect myself. But for a lot of my friends that they don't, and it's really a really horrible issue for them to do.
Joe?
I think it's in part of the male psyche. When I first got on the Letterman show, I did the show, I went back to Boston, and some of my friends were asking me, so what happened there? I told them, I stayed at the hotel, did the show, and then fly back to Boston. They were like, that's it? There's no after parties where there's a lot of alcohol and pretty women? I said, no, I just go there and do my jokes and come back. But a lot of, not just women, a lot of men also expect to be a lot of sexual favors in show business, and that's probably part of the reason why a lot of men get into this business too. But what really surprised me was I worked in the United States for 10 years, not in the film industry, but in biotech. And every year there's a sexual harassment training from HR. And the rules are very strict in workplaces. But I guess in show business, the producers and directors has very big power over who they can choose from. It's not like in biotech.
Yeah, it's about
it's exactly the question I would like to pose to Kelly there. Now, as we mentioned, America boasts some of the world's most comprehensive anti-harassment laws and policies, and schools and companies, as Joe just mentioned, dedicate vast resources to harassment education and training. Why haven't these measures worked?
I believe that the arts are highly socialized people. You meet a lot of people. There are so many different events and things that you start combining your life into. And once you get into that lane, it might be hard for some people to stop. Luckily, I grew up around some things where I just noticed stuff and I was able to protect myself, and I still had things happen to me that were bizarre and had no logic to them at all. So when people ask me, why does this happen? Well, it has to do with power, because it's not about sex, it's about assaulting. And that is a violent act. And so that has to do with some really deep issues as a society of what we allow our behavior to override when we feel that we were in the company of someone with a lot of power, and that maybe we feel we don't have any power, and we would like theirs. And that's how Harvey Weinstein has been able to manipulate, is he interviews the women for all the roles.
Yeah.
He have to go to him.
A lot of power, yeah.
Right.
A very quick question, because now we're not just seeing the showbiz being shattered or devastated by these scandals, but also in politics, right? Across the Atlantic, in the UK, in the United States, a former president even being inflicted.
President.
Oh,
well, yeah. So
Right.
all of these talks.
yeah.
Joe, yeah. Why do you think all of these accusations are popping out at this particular moment?
Well, in politics, it's been years. You know, like in Clinton era, there's a term for this. It's called bimbo eruption. Bimbo eruption. Of course, it's a very derogatory word to describe women who came up with their stories, but that's what Clinton's people call these women. You know, I think it's always been there, but with the internet and the fast flow of information, we should know about them faster and easier.
Yeah, because I think the society is finally like transformed, and we finally have more awareness on this kind of issues, on women's rights, on like sexual assaultment against women.
Yeah. Do you think after what happened now, things are going to change for the better, Joe?
It's hard to say.
Kelly says yes, but Joe, you're not 100% sure why.
Yeah, because you know, guys are guys. You know, sometimes they will. You can make tougher laws, but then there are still going to be people who break these laws. You know, but I guess you know, if people can learn from it, it could improve. But I think systematically, it might be hard.
Okay, we'll really have to wait and see, but let's hope that some positive changes will occur from now on. Many thanks to our guests, Kelly Desmore in California, Joe Wan and Pang Ying-Xin here in the studio. And my last point, really, I think the tidal wave of women breaking silence is a positive thing. Hopefully this will raise awareness, introduce more comprehensive laws and stricter enforcement, on top of the new measures such as hotlines and trainings that are not just on paper. Yet what the laws cannot do needs to be complemented by other forms of education. I mean, what is moral, what is not? This needs to be taught. The abuse of drugs and alcohol, promiscuity that has become a norm, and possibly other vices that could influence one's behavior. I risk being called an old-fashioned conservative here, but I do think, given the reality we're living in, we need to pay attention to the situations we are entering to ensure all steps have been taken to protect ourselves. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.